My town is dying of fear, and I'm the only one who knows the monster they're afraid of isn't real. They call it the Ghost Wolf of Granite Peak. The name started as a whisper in the general store, a hushed conversation over beers at the tavern, and now it's a headline scream from the front page of our little local paper. A creature of impossible size and spectral cleverness, a phantom that slips through fences and leaves behind carnage that turns the stomachs of even the most hardened ranchers. Sheep, calves, even a prize-winning alpaca, all savaged in the dead of night. The town is in a full-blown panic. Doors are bolted earlier. Kids are kept inside after dusk, and a heavy, oppressive silence has replaced the usual evening chorus of crickets and rustling pines. It feels like we're living under a siege. I'm Wes. I've lived in this remote mountain town for 30 years, 20 of them, as a wildlife biologist for the Park Service, the last 10 as a forced retiree living in a small cabin that backs up against the national forest. Most people here see me as a relic, a quiet man who keeps to himself, more comfortable with the company of birds than people. They've forgotten what I used to do, what I used to be. But I haven't. Today the panic reached its peak. Mayor Caldwell, a man whose tailored suits always look out of place against our rugged backdrop, called a town meeting. The old community hall was packed, the air thick with the smell of wet wool and anxiety. He stood on the small stage, projecting an aura of control that was as manufactured as the perfect part in his hair. He spoke of decisive action, of safety, of community. Then came the announcement that drew a wave of relieved applause. He had hired a team of professional big-game hunters. "These men are the best," he declared, his voice booming with false confidence. "They will track this beast, and they will put an end to this threat." I wasn't listening to his words. My eyes were fixed on a folding table to the side of the stage. On it, displayed like a sacred artifact, was a plaster cast of a paw print, taken from the mud near the latest kill. The source of all this terror. From my seat in the back, I could already tell something was wrong. After the applause died down, and people started shuffling out, their faces a little less grim, I made my way forward. I didn't want to cause a scene, I just needed to see it up close. The plaster was cool and heavy in my hands. I ran my thumb over the indentations. It was a beautiful print, a perfect record of the animal's foot. And it was all wrong. The overall size was staggering, far larger than any gray wolf, even an alpha male from the northern territories. But it was the details that screamed the truth at me. The shape of the metacarpal pad, the large central part of the paw, was too distinctly lobed at the top. And the claws, the impressions were there, but they were faint, barely scratching the surface of the mud. Wolves have non-retractable claws. They're always out, always prominent in their tracks, like cleats on a running shoe. They need them for traction. This creature had semi-retractable claws, like a cat. A very, very big cat. My blood ran cold. The gait analysis from the attack patterns, the sheer power needed to drag a 200-pound calf over a 6-foot fence, it all clicked into place with a sickening certainty. This was no wolf. I saw Mayor Caldwell by the stage, shaking hands and accepting pats on the back. His father, Alistair Caldwell, the town's reclusive, mythically wealthy founder, was nowhere to be seen, as usual. The mayor was the public face of the Caldwell dynasty, the one who managed the town his father had essentially built from the ground up as his own personal fiefdom. I approached him cautiously, holding the cast. "Mayor," I said, my voice low, "you have a problem. This isn't a wolf." He turned, a politician's smile plastered on his face. It faltered slightly when he saw it was me. He sees me the same way the rest of the town does, as a ghost of the past. "Wes," he said, the single word carrying a universe of condescension. "I appreciate your concern, but we have this handled." "No, you don't," I insisted, forcing him to look at the cast. "Look at the morphology. The interdigital splay, the lack of prominent claw marks. This print belongs to a pantherin, a tiger, to be specific. And given the location and rarity, I'd bet my life it's a Caspian." His smile vanished completely, replaced by a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. Was it annoyance, or was it fear? He snatched the cast from my hand, his knuckles white. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening.
Ooh.
A tiger, he scoffed, his voice a harsh whisper. Are you drunk, Wes? There are no tigers in North America. There are no Caspian tigers left anywhere in the wild. Exactly, I said, meeting his gaze. They're extinct in the wild. But a few dozen exist in private, highly illegal collections. Trophies for men with too much money and no conscience. Men who might live on, say, a sprawling, high-security estate on the top of this very mountain. The air between us crackled. We both knew I was talking about his father. Alistair Caldwell's obsession with collecting the rare and the forbidden was legendary. The man had a private road, a private security force, and a reputation for getting whatever he wanted, legal or not. Mayor Caldwell's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. You will keep your wild, senile theories to yourself. This town is in a panic, and I will not have you making it worse with your ghost stories. He shoved the plaster cast back at me, so hard it almost slipped from my grasp. Go home, Wes. With all due respect, leave the monster hunting to the professionals. He turned his back on me and walked away, a man dismissing a gnat. But it was the public nature of it, the way he'd spoken down to me in the open hall, the visible sneer on his face as he walked away that felt like a deliberate blow. It was a public shaming. He wasn't just disagreeing with my biology, he was erasing me, silencing the one person who knew the real danger. And in that moment I knew he wasn't ignorant of the truth. He was terrified of it. He already knew what was out there, and he had hired those hunters not just to kill an animal, but to bury a secret. His family's secret, a secret that was now my burden to carry. I retreated to my cabin on the edge of the woods, the silence inside a stark contrast to the buzzing panic in my head. The heavy plaster cast sat on my workbench, a monument to my humiliation. I sank into my worn armchair, the one with the permanent impression of my body, and stared out the window at the darkening pines. The mayor's words echoed in my mind. Go home, Wes. Leave it to the professionals. It wasn't just the condescension that stung. It was the chilling familiarity of it all. It felt like history repeating itself. A bitter song I'd heard before. My hands trembled slightly, a frustrating betrayal by my own body. I felt a wave of impotent rage wash over me. Here I was, a man with a doctorate in zoology, a man who had spent 3 decades tracking, studying, and protecting the very wilderness the Caldwells now treated as their personal playground, and I was being dismissed like a rambling old fool. It was the ultimate irony. The town I had dedicated my life to was in mortal danger, not from some mythical beast, but from the arrogance of the very family that claimed to be its protector. The mayor wasn't protecting the town, he was protecting his father. He was managing a public relations crisis, and the truth was the one thing he couldn't afford to let out. The tiger, a magnificent, terrifying, and ultimately innocent creature, was just collateral damage. And so was I. I closed my eyes and the present faded away, replaced by the ghost of a much younger, more hopeful version of myself. I was standing in this same town hall but 15 years ago. I wasn't a retiree then. I was Dr. Wesley Thorne, head biologist for the Granite Peak National Preserve. I was at a podium, not hiding in the back. My voice was steady, my arguments backed by binders full of ecological data and impact studies. Opposite me sat Alistair Caldwell, the patriarch himself, his face like a granite carving, radiating an aura of immense, unshakable power. His son, a much younger but no less smug Mayor Caldwell, sat beside him looking like a vulture in training. Alistair wanted to build a luxury ski resort and a golf course in the pristine heart of the Silver Creek Basin, a vital watershed and breeding ground for several endangered species. It was an ecological travesty, a billionaire's whim that would permanently scar the land I was sworn to protect. I laid out the facts calmly and rationally. I spoke of water tables, of habitat fragmentation, of the delicate balance that once broken could never be fully restored. I had the law, the science, and morality on my side. Alistair had money. He didn't debate my science. He attacked me. Through his son and his lawyers, he launched a campaign. They didn't argue the facts. They created new ones. They dredged up a minor procedural error from 5 years prior, a misfiled quarterly report, a clerical mistake that had been rectified and had no consequences. But in their hands it became a symbol of my incompetence, my recklessness. They whispered to state officials, donated handsomely to political campaigns, and fed stories to friendly journalists. The narrative shifted from protecting the wilderness to incompetent bureaucrat, standing in the way of progress. My superiors, men I had respected, buckled under the pressure. I was given a choice: resign quietly with my full pension or be fired for cause and lose everything. It was a checkmate. I was 45 years old, too old to start over somewhere new, too proud to fight a battle I had already lost. So I took the deal. I retired. I retreated. I became the quiet man in the cabin, the town hermit. Alistair got his resort, and I got a front row seat to watch the slow degradation of the land I loved. The mayor's dismissal tonight wasn't a new wound. It was him pressing a thumb into the scar tissue of an old one. My mind jumped forward, to a more recent, more unsettling memory. It was about 2 years ago. I was hiking a remote trail on the backside of the mountain, a place few people ever go. From a high ridge, I had a clear view of the winding private road leading up to Alistair Caldwell's mountain fortress. It was an estate so large and isolated, it was practically its own country. That afternoon, I saw a convoy of unmarked climate-controlled transport trucks making the slow, careful journey up the mountain. It was odd. I'd heard whispers in town, rumors from disgruntled former staff at the estate about Alistair's collections getting more and more exotic. People joked about him trying to build Noah's Ark. I'd seen manifests at the local freight office addressed to his holding company for things like rare orchids and antique statues. But these trucks were different. They were the kind used for live, sensitive cargo. At the time, I chalked it up to another eccentricity of the obscenely rich. Maybe he was importing rare horses or something. I pushed it from my mind. But now the memory returned with horrifying clarity. The Caspian tiger, Panthera tigris virgata, extinct in the wild since the 1970s. A ghost species. But a handful, bred from a few zoo specimens captured decades ago, were rumored to be circulating in the shadowy, ultra-exclusive black market of exotic animals. It was the ultimate status symbol for a collector like Alistair Caldwell, a living ghost, a creature he could own that no one else could. He hadn't just bought a tiger, he had bought a legend, and now his legend had escaped its golden cage. He had brought this plague upon us, and his son was trying to cover it up with a lie dressed up as a wolf hunt. A sharp rapping on my door jolted me back to the present. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened it to find Jed, a local rancher whose property bordered the national forest. His face was a road map of worry, his knuckles white as he gripped the brim of his hat. He was the one who lost the prize-winning alpaca. He'd never had much time for me, always seeing me as a government man who cared more about predators than livestock. "Heard what you said to the mayor," Jed grunted, not meeting my eye. "It's the truth," I said simply. "The hunters were at my place today," he continued, finally looking up. His eyes were tired. "They're laying wolf traps, talking about pack dynamics. They're looking for the wrong animal, aren't they?" "They are," I confirmed. "They're wasting precious time." Then the news on the small television in my living room cut through our conversation. A breaking report. Another attack. This time closer to the town's edge at the Miller farm. A young foal taken from a paddock not 50 yards from the house. My stomach clenched, but it was what the reporter said next that lit a fire in me. Sheriff's Department officials on the scene note that the carcass was dragged nearly a quarter of a mile into the dense woods and was found partially buried under a pile of leaves and dirt. I looked at Jed. His face went pale. "Wolves don't do that," he whispered. "They eat at the kill site. They don't hide it." "No," I said, my voice low and hard. "They don't, but tigers do. It's called caching. They hide their kill to protect it from scavengers and return to it later." The hunters were on a fool's errand. They were chasing a phantom wolf while a very real, very hungry tiger was getting bolder, moving closer to town. The mayor's lie wasn't just a cover-up anymore. It was a direct and imminent threat to public safety. A child could be next. And in that moment something inside me shifted. The resignation, the feeling of helpless retreat, it all burned away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't about my bruised ego or my stolen career anymore. This was about stopping a disaster that the Caldwells had unleashed. I looked from the plaster cast on my workbench to the fear in Jed's eyes, and I made a decision. I would not be silenced. I would not be a ghost in my own town. I was going to prove what was in those woods, and I was going to expose the men who put it there. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about the animal, about the town. But as I thought of the mayor's smug, dismissive face, a darker, colder thought surfaced. It wasn't about revenge until it was. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. And the Caldwells had just crossed the last one. The path forward was dangerously unclear. I couldn't go to the authorities. Mayor Caldwell was the authorities in this town. The county sheriff was his cousin and owed his position to the Caldwell family's influence. The state wildlife department would listen to the mayor of a constituent town before they'd listen to a disgraced retired biologist with a wild theory. Calling the media would be a disaster. They'd paint me as a crackpot, a crazy old hermit spinning conspiracy theories. The ghost wolf was a much better story than escaped illegal tiger. It was mythic, simple. My version was complicated and accusatory. I would be discredited before I even got started. No, I had to operate outside the system. I needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable, slam-dunk proof that would leave no room for doubt or spin. I needed to prove, not just that it was a tiger, but that it came from Alistair Caldwell's mountaintop prison. I needed to connect the animal to the man. My cabin, once a place of quiet retreat, transformed into a tactical operations center. I pulled out my old gear from my days with the Park Service, stored in dusty footlockers in the shed. Motion-activated trail cameras, military-grade night vision goggles, parabolic microphones, GPS trackers. Technology that was once used to study deer migration and bear populations would now be repurposed for a far more dangerous quarry. My first step was to build a coalition of the trustworthy, a tiny island of truth in a sea of ignorance and fear. My first and most unlikely recruit was Jed. I drove out to his ranch the next morning. The air was heavy with the smell of manure and dread. He was repairing a section of fence that had been shattered in a previous attack. He worked with a grim, silent fury. I didn't try to charm him or persuade him. I just laid out the facts like a scientist. I brought a laptop with me, loaded with research papers and anatomical diagrams. I showed him side-by-side comparisons of wolf and tiger skulls, pointing out the difference in the sagittal crest, the anchor point for the jaw muscles. "A wolf's bite is powerful, Jade," I explained. "Around 400 pounds per square inch. It's designed to snap bones. A tiger's bite is over 1,000 psi. It's designed to crush cervical vertebrae, to suffocate." I pulled up photos from the internet of tiger kills and compared them to the photos Jade had taken of his own dead livestock. The pattern of trauma was identical. The deep puncture wounds at the base of the skull, the crushed windpipe. Then I showed him a video of a tiger dragging a kill. "See how it holds the neck? See how it pulls with its shoulders? That's what made those drag marks on your land." He stopped working. He stared at the screen, his gruff exterior cracking. He was a man who had spent his life around animals. He understood the language of the wild, the brutal grammar of predator and prey. He knew I was right. "That son of a bitch," he muttered, shaking his head. "He put that thing up there, and his son is helping him cover it up," I added. Jade became my eyes and ears. He knew the back roads, the cattle trails, the forgotten logging tracks better than anyone. He knew the places an animal would travel to avoid human contact. He was my ground support. My next stop was a 2-hour drive out of the county, to a small town where my old colleague Dr. Anya Sharma ran a veterinary clinic. Anya was more than just a vet. She was a brilliant pathologist with a specialty in wildlife forensics. She was one of the few people from my old life who hadn't turned her back on me after the Caldwell affair. I walked into her clinic carrying a locked cooler. Inside, packed in ice, were soil samples from the drag marks on Jade's property, and a small piece of fabric snagged from a fence post, which I hoped contained a hair or two. And of course the plaster cast. Anya cleared a stainless steel table. She looked at the cast, her sharp, intelligent eyes taking in every detail. She didn't need any convincing. "My God, Wes," she breathed, tracing the outline with her finger. "The metacarpal arch, the asymmetry of the toes. This is a pantherine, no doubt. And the size, it's a male, a very big one. Caspian," I said. She nodded slowly. "It fits. They were known for being particularly massive. Stockier than a Siberian, but just as long." She looked at me, her expression grim. "Where did this come from?" "Granite Peak. They're calling it a wolf." I explained the whole situation. The Caldwells, the cover-up, the hunters. Anya listened without interruption, her frown deepening. "They're going to get someone killed," she said, her voice tight with anger. "This animal is probably confused, hungry, and terrified. A stressed tiger is the most dangerous animal on the planet." She took the samples. "I can run a mitochondrial DNA analysis on any hair follicles you find. It won't give us a specific individual, but it will confirm the species and subspecies, and likely the geographic origin of its ancestral line. It's a start. Get me a better sample, Wes. Scat blood, a clear tuft of fur, something I can run a full sequence on. That could be traceable to known captive bloodlines. That would be your smoking gun." I had my scientific validation. Now I needed to play a more dangerous game. I needed to get inside the Caldwells' heads. I saw the mayor's son, Deputy Marcus Caldwell, at the general store. He was a young man, maybe 25, with his father's height, but none of his arrogance. He had a good heart. You could see it in his eyes. He looked weighed down, torn. He was a lawman, but he was also a Caldwell. I saw him fumbling with a can of beans, his mind clearly a million miles away. I approached him quietly. "Marcus," I said. He started, surprised to see me. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his tone respectful, unlike his father's. "Your father's in a tough spot," I said, keeping my voice conversational. "He's a good mayor, always wants to project strength, but he's also a good son, fiercely loyal to your grandfather." I paused, letting the words sink in. "The thing is, Marcus, sometimes those two things, being a good mayor and a good son, can't exist in the same person. Sometimes you have to choose." He looked at me, his expression guarded. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the truth," I said. "Ask your father about the shipping manifests for the estate from 2 years ago, the ones from the Zurich freight forwarder. Ask him what was in those climate-controlled crates that required a veterinarian to sign off on the import documents." I wasn't sure if any of that was true, but it was specific enough to be plausible. It was a seed of doubt, a targeted piece of information designed to make him question the official story. I was banking on his conscience. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. He didn't say a word. He just turned and walked out of the store. I had no idea if I'd just recruited an ally or signed my own death warrant. My final piece of the plan was the most critical: finding the tiger's lair. It wouldn't be out in the open. It would be seeking shelter, a place of darkness and security. I spent 2 days poring over old geological survey maps of the region. The Caldwell estate was built on the north face of Granite Peak, but the map showed that the south face, the side that sloped down towards the national forest, was riddled with old abandoned iron ore and silver mines from the 19th century. The tunnels were officially sealed, but I knew from my Park Service days that sealed often just meant a rusty gate or a pile of rocks. An animal of that size and power could easily get through, and one of the main shafts, according to the map, had an air vent that surfaced less than half a mile from the perimeter of Alistair Caldwell's sprawling property. That was it. The tiger had escaped its enclosure and, seeking refuge, had found a natural cave system that led it out of its prison and into the wild. It was likely using those tunnels as a base of operations, a secure den from which it could hunt at night. My hidden leverage, my undeniable proof, was in that mine. I wasn't going to hunt a tiger. I was going to photograph it in its new home. I needed high-quality, irrefutable video evidence and a clean DNA sample. The plan was no longer just about proving the tiger's existence. It was about documenting its origin. I had my allies. I had my strategy. Now I just had to go into the darkness and face the ghost myself. The silent takeover began not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a trail camera being strapped to a tree. Jed and I worked for 2 straight nights, moving under the cover of darkness, our headlamps casting dancing beams through the dense undergrowth. We avoided the main trails where the mayor's hunters were clumsily setting their wolf snares. Instead, Jed led me through game trails so faint they were little more than suggestions in the landscape. We were ghosts ourselves, moving through the forest with a shared, unspoken purpose. We focused on the network of paths leading to the abandoned mine entrances on the south side of the mountain. There were 3 main shafts, their entrances choked with debris and half swallowed by the forest. But for an animal of the tiger's size, they were gaping doorways. I set up my high-end trail cams at strategic choke points, places the animal would have to pass to enter or exit the tunnel system. These weren't your standard hunting cameras. They were research grade, with silent infrared triggers and high-definition night vision capable of capturing crystal-clear footage in total darkness. The real stroke of genius, though, was the lure. Baiting the area with a dead sheep would be too obvious and would attract every scavenger for miles. It might even make the tiger wary. I needed to appeal to its nature, not just its hunger. On Anya's advice, I concocted a potent olfactory cocktail. I used a concentrated catnip oil. The nepidolactone affects big cats just as profoundly as it does house cats, and mixed it with a synthetic tiger pheromone spray used by zoos to encourage breeding and reduce stress in captive animals. I soaked a few rags in the mixture and hung them from branches near the cameras. The idea was to create a scent signature so intriguing, so compelling, that the tiger's curiosity would override its caution. It was a long shot, a desperate piece of biological warfare. Days bled into a week. Every morning before dawn, I'd make the trek to a pre-arranged dead drop spot where I'd swap out the memory cards from the cameras. And every day the result was the same: hours of footage of rustling leaves, the ghostly white shapes of deer passing in the night, a curious raccoon sniffing the lens. Nothing. Meanwhile, the town's fear was curdling into anger. The hunters were coming up empty. They'd been sold a bill of goods, tracking a wolf pack that didn't exist, following trails that went nowhere. Their frustration was becoming public knowledge. Mayor Caldwell held another press conference, his composure beginning to fray at the edges. He looked tired, his expensive suit looking less like a symbol of authority and more like a costume. He was losing the narrative. His rhetoric grew more desperate. He started blaming outside influences, suggesting eco-saboteurs were intentionally laying false trails to disrupt the hunt. It was a thinly veiled accusation aimed directly at me. I watched the broadcast on the small TV in my cabin, and I almost felt a sliver of pity for him. He was a man drowning in his father's mess, and he was thrashing wildly, trying to pull everyone else under with him. The first sign that my plan was working came from Jed. He called me on a burner phone I'd bought for us to communicate. His voice was low and urgent. Wes, I was checking the fences up by the old logging road, the one that leads up towards the south slope. Found fresh tire tracks. A big SUV. Looked like the mayor's. What was he doing up there? I asked. That road's been washed out for years. That's the thing, Jed said. He wasn't on the road. He was parked near the trailhead to the old silver mine. The one we call the Devil's Throat. Looked like he was just sitting there. Then he turned around and left in a hurry. He's spooked, Wes. He knows something's up there. He's checking on it. The mayor was panicking. My seed of doubt planted with his son Marcus must have taken root. Marcus must have confronted him, asked him about the manifests, about the crates. And now the mayor was doing his own reconnaissance, terrified that I was getting too close to the truth. He wasn't just covering for his father anymore. He was actively trying to manage the location of the evidence. He knew where the tiger was hiding. Then came the second call, this one from Anya. Wes, I got a preliminary result from the soil samples you brought me. Found trace amounts of fecal matter. Not enough for a full sequence, but I was able to isolate the mitochondrial DNA. She paused, and I could hear you. It's a match, Panthera tigris virgata, the Caspian tiger, and there's more. The haplotype is consistent with the lineage from the old Baghdad Zoo, which was famously looted. A few of those animals disappeared into the private market. This isn't just a tiger, Wes. It's a stolen piece of history. The feds would have a field day with this. The pieces were locking into place. I had the science, I had the motive, and I had the antagonist rattled. All I needed now was the star of the show to make his appearance. That night the weather turned. A cold, miserable rain began to fall, turning the forest floor into a slick carpet of mud and leaves. I almost didn't make my morning run to check the cameras. It seemed pointless, but something nagged at me. I pulled on my waterproof gear and headed out in the pre-dawn gloom. The forest was eerily quiet, the rain muffling every sound. I swapped the memory cards and headed back to my cabin, my boots heavy with mud. I didn't expect much. I plugged the first card into my laptop, sipping my coffee as the files loaded. The first few hours were nothing but the hypnotic shimmer of rain falling through the infrared beam. I fast-forwarded through the footage, my finger hovering over the mouse, and then I saw it. My heart stopped. The rain had momentarily let up. A shape, low and massive, moved with a liquid grace into the frame. It was impossibly large, its striped coat a ghostly pattern in the black and white of the night vision. The tiger. It moved with a supreme confidence, a silent, fluid power that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was magnificent, terrifying, and beautiful. It approached the scent rag I'd hung on a low-hanging pine branch. It sniffed it delicately, its huge head cocked with curiosity. Then it looked directly into the camera lens. Its eyes glowed with an unnerving intelligence, two white-hot orbs in the darkness. It was as if it knew I was watching. For a full 30 seconds it just stood there, staring me down through time and technology. I could clearly see a faint, jagged scar above its right eye, a unique identifier. Then it turned its head and rubbed its cheek against the rough bark of the pine tree, right where the lure was. A classic scent-marking behavior. As it pulled away, I saw it. A small, perfect tuft of coarse orange and black fur, snagged on a shard of bark. I had it. I had everything. The video was stunning, undeniable proof. And on that tree waiting for me was my smoking gun, my DNA sample. The silent takeover was complete. The power was about to shift. The feeling that washed over me wasn't triumph. It was a cold, heavy certainty. The game had changed, and I was holding all the cards. I spent the next hour carefully editing the footage, selecting the single most damning still frame, the one where the tiger stared into the lens, the scar over its eye perfectly clear. It was a portrait of Alistair Caldwell's crime. I composed a new anonymous email on an encrypted service. The recipient was Mayor Caldwell's official government address, an account I knew he monitored constantly. I left the subject line chillingly simple: Panthera tigris virgata. The body of the email was even simpler. It contained no text, no threats, no demands, just the single, high-resolution image of the tiger's face. I hit send, and the silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I knew what he would be feeling. Not just fear, but the dizzying vertigo of a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling beneath his feet. My silence was the real weapon. It gave him nothing to fight against, no one to negotiate with. It left him alone with the terrifying truth of the image on his screen, and the infinite, horrifying possibilities of what I would do with it next. I didn't have to wait long. An hour later, my burner phone rang. It was an unlisted number. I answered and said nothing. Wes? The voice on the other end was strained, stripped of all its usual arrogance. It was Mayor Caldwell, and he sounded like a man whispering from the bottom of a well. I still said nothing. Let him squirm. Wes, God damn it. I know it's you, he snapped. A flicker of his old self returning before being instantly extinguished by desperation. We need to talk. Privately. Please. There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice flat and cold. Yes, that is, insisted, his voice dropping. Listen, my father, he's an old man. He gets these ideas. It was a mistake, Wes. A sentimental one. He loved these animals. He thought he was preserving them. We can handle this quietly. We can make sure the animal is taken care of, and we can make sure you're taken care of. I almost laughed. It was the classic Caldwell playbook. When threats and dismissals fail, open the checkbook. They believed every problem had a price tag, that every man's integrity could be bought. He was trying to turn this into a transaction, to reduce a life or death situation to a simple matter of negotiation. What do you want, Wes? He asked, his voice now pleading. A consulting fee. A public apology for the misunderstanding about your retirement. Name your price. We can make this whole thing go away. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance of it was breathtaking. Even now, with his world on the verge of collapse, he still thought he was in control. He still thought he could buy his way out of the consequences. He didn't understand. It was never about the money. I don't want your money, Mayor, I said, letting the silence hang for a moment. I want a meeting, tomorrow, noon, at the town hall, in the community room where you held your little press conference. Fine, yes, of course, he said, relief flooding his voice. He thought he was getting the negotiation he wanted. And you won't be coming alone, I continued, my tone leaving no room for argument. You will bring your father, and you will bring the lead hunter from your professional team. Be there. I hung up before he could respond. The power had shifted. He had tried to manipulate me with money and condescension, but now he was coming to a meeting on my terms, at my location, with my list of attendees. He was no longer the mayor managing a crisis. He was just a terrified son, about to be confronted with the full scope of his father's sins. And I was no longer the town hermit. I was the man who held the truth on a leash. The next morning I made the hike back to the pine tree near the mine. The tuft of fur was still there, caught on the bark, a tiny perfect splash of color against the gray wood. I carefully tweezed it into a sterile evidence bag. My smoking gun. I then drove to the meeting spot an hour early. I didn't go alone. I'd called Anya and Jed the night before. Anya drove in from her clinic, carrying a leather briefcase. Jed showed up in his work truck, his face set with a grim resolve. They were my backup, my witnesses. I set up a large monitor on the same stage where the mayor had dismissed me. I connected it to my laptop. The community hall was empty and silent, a stark contrast to the panicked energy of the last meeting. It felt like the calm at the center of a storm. At noon on the dot, the doors opened. Mayor Caldwell entered first. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Behind him was Alistair Caldwell, the patriarch, the legend. In person, he looked smaller than his reputation, a frail old man swimming in an expensive cashmere coat. But his eyes were still sharp, cold, and filled with a lifetime of unchallenged authority. Flanking them was the lead hunter, a burly man named Croft, whose face was a mask of confusion and irritation. He clearly had no idea why he'd been summoned. The mayor's eyes scanned the room and saw Anya and Jed standing with me. A flash of anger crossed his face. "You said this would be private, Wes." "I said we would talk." "I never said we would be alone," I replied calmly. I gestured to the chairs I'd set up in front of the stage. "Please, sit." They hesitated, but complied. They sat like defendants in a courtroom. Just as I was about to begin, the main door creaked open again. Deputy Marcus Caldwell walked in. He was in his uniform. He looked at his father, then at his grandfather. His face was pale but determined. He walked over to my side of the room and stood slightly behind me, his hand resting on the grip of his service weapon. It wasn't a threat, it was a declaration. He had chosen a side. The law was no longer with the Caldwells. Alistair Caldwell scoffed, a dry, rustling sound. "Get on with it, Thorne. What is this theatrical nonsense?" I didn't respond to him. I just clicked the mouse on my laptop. The monitor flickered to life. The silent black and white footage filled the screen. The tiger, moving with that liquid power. The whole room was silent, mesmerized. I let the full minute of footage play out, ending with the long, unnerving stare directly into the camera. I heard Croft, the hunter, suck in a sharp breath. "Sweet mother," he whispered. I paused the video on the close-up of the tiger's face, the scar clearly visible. "This is what has been terrorizing our town," I said, my voice even and measured. "Not a wolf, not a ghost, a Caspian tiger. Male, approximately 500 pounds. I looked at Croft. "You've been hunting the wrong animal, Mr. Croft. You've been on a wild goose chase, set up to fail, while this animal has been getting closer and closer to town. I have to wonder, did the mayor inform you that your target was a tiger? Did he warn you of the real danger you and your men were in?" Croft's head snapped toward the mayor, his eyes blazing with fury. "You son of a bitch, you had us tracking a wolf. We could have been killed." Mayor Caldwell stammered. We had it under control." "No, you didn't." I cut in. I turned to Anya. "Dr. Sharma." Anya stepped forward and opened her briefcase. "I ran a DNA analysis on a sample recovered from the location where this video was filmed," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "The results confirm the animal is Panthera tigris virgata."
The haplotype is consistent with a bloodline known to have been sold on the black market after disappearing from the Baghdad Zoo.
"It's a federally protected endangered species, the illegal importation and possession of which carries a mandatory prison sentence and fines in the millions." Alistair Caldwell, who had been watching with cold detachment, finally spoke. "This is circumstantial. You can't prove that animal is mine." "Can't I?" I said. I clicked to the next image on the screen. It was a photo I'd found in an old article from an exotic animal breeder's magazine, profiling Alistair's collection years ago. The photo was of a much younger tiger cub, a Caspian cub, and right above its right eye was a small, faint but unmistakable scar. The same scar. "You were so proud of your prize, you couldn't resist showing it off," I said softly. "You just forgot the internet is forever." The air went out of the room. The mayor slumped in his chair, his face ashen. Alistair just stared at the screen, his mask of invincibility finally cracking. "What do you want, Wes?" the mayor asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was the same question he'd asked on the phone, but this time, the desperation was real. The offer of money was gone, replaced by the stench of pure fear. I looked him straight in the eye. "Want?" I said. "This isn't about what I want anymore. This is about what's going to happen." I took a step forward. My voice didn't need to be loud to command the room. First, you are going to call off Mr. Croft and his men. The hunt is over. Effective immediately. Second, you are going to finance a professional capture and relocation team. A real one. Veterinarians, proper tranquilizers, a transport vehicle. I will select the team and I will personally supervise the entire operation to ensure the animal's safety. Third, your father's entire menagerie. Every last animal will be voluntarily surrendered and audited by the proper federal authorities and animal welfare organizations. Every cage will be emptied. And finally, I said, leaning on the table in front of him, you are going to stand in front of this town, and you are going to tell them the truth. All of it. The tiger, the cover-up, the lies. You are going to apologize for the fear you let them live in to protect your family's name. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. Alistair started to rise from his chair, a protest forming on his lips, but his own son, Marcus, took a deliberate step forward. The message was clear. The time for deals and threats was over. The mayor looked at his son, then at me, then at the image of the tiger on the screen. He looked like a man watching his own execution. He slowly, numbly, nodded his head. It was over. The vindication was quiet, but absolute. The fallout was swift and spectacular. Mayor Caldwell, looking like a ghost of his former self, held a press conference that afternoon. He stood at the podium, his voice trembling, and confessed everything. The townspeople listened in stunned silence, their fear turning to a cold, hard anger. The story of the ghost wolf was replaced by the sordid tale of a billionaire's illegal pet and a mayor's criminal cover-up. It was a political implosion of epic proportions. Federal agents, alerted by an anonymous tip from Dr. Sharma, descended on the Caldwell estate. The media circus was immense. Alistair Caldwell, the untouchable patriarch of Granite Peak, was charged with a litany of federal crimes related to the trafficking of endangered species. His mystique, the carefully cultivated image of a powerful and benevolent founder, was shattered overnight. He became just another rich criminal, his name a byword for arrogance and disgrace. The Tiger, or Khan, as the sanctuary later named him, was the one truly innocent party in all of this. The team I selected was top-notch. We tracked him back to the mine system. I went in with the lead veterinarian. Seeing him in person, not on a screen, but in the beam of a flashlight, was a humbling experience. He wasn't a monster. He was just a magnificent animal, out of place and out of time. The vet darted him expertly. As he succumbed to the tranquilizer, I knelt down and laid a hand on his flank. I could feel the immense power, even in slumber. We had him loaded into a climate-controlled crate and transported to a specialized large cat sanctuary in Colorado, a place with acres of land for him to roam. I stood on the loading dock and watched the truck pull away, feeling a profound sense of relief. We had saved him from the hunters, and we had saved him from the cage. In the weeks that followed, things in Granite Peak began to change. Mayor Caldwell resigned in disgrace. His son, Marcus, was appointed interim mayor, and the first thing he did was come to my cabin. He just shook my hand and said, "Thank you." It was more than enough. The town started looking at me differently. I wasn't the town hermit anymore. I was Wes, the man who had exposed the truth. Jed would stop by with a bag of groceries sometimes, just to talk. We'd sit on my porch, two old mountain men who had found an unlikely respect for one another. The fear in the town was gone, replaced by a sense of quiet resilience. The Caldwell's reign was over, and that's how it all ended. It was never really about the ghost wolf, was it? It was about a different kind of ghost, the ghost of unaccountability, the phantom of wealth and power that allows some people to believe they live above the law, above consequences. The Caldwells built this town, but somewhere along the way, they came to believe they owned it, and everyone and everything in it. They forgot that the truth, like a powerful animal, has a way of breaking free from any cage you try to build for it. Some people, I'm sure, would say that I went too far, that I could have handled it quietly, that I ruined a family to prove a point. They might argue that my motives weren't pure, that the old wound of my forced retirement was what really drove me. And maybe they're not entirely wrong. It wasn't about revenge until it was. But when I look back, I know I did what had to be done. It was about respect. Respect for the truth that had been buried. Respect for the good people of this town who deserved to feel safe. And respect for a magnificent creature that deserved a life of dignity. Not a life as some billionaire's secret trophy. And maybe, just maybe, after all those years of being a ghost myself, it was about reclaiming a little bit of respect for myself too. So I have to ask you, what do you think? Did I do the right thing? Was there another way to handle it? Or was a public confrontation the only way to ensure real change? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story compelling, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about the moment people finally decide they've had enough. Thanks for listening.